Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host. Just got back into town. There's been a change with a guest. So instead of me canceling the show, I decided I'm going to run a replay of Dr. George Gaines. That aired back in July of 2017. If you didn't catch it, you're going to want to catch his story this time. Now, this was back before I was recording or running live streams with video. So it's just audio, but it's a great story, very interesting man, and I'm sure you'll really like that. A couple of things. Next week, we have Chris Lato back on. He's the retired F-16 pilot. He's been working hard. He's done a lot of things positive in the UFO field. We're going to be talking to him about that. The following week, I'm going to be coming at you from James Fox home and studio over in Vermont. You don't want to miss that one. That should be a lot of fun. And that'll be on May 3rd. So down in the show notes, you'll see a link that I'm going to be on a show right after this one with the New York MUFON eye detective Chris DiPerno. So that will also be in the audio feed on our podcast. And speaking of audio feeds, our blog is made into an audio blog every week, and that's always on our podcast feed by Charles Lear. And this week, it's called A UFO Creature Encounter Report from Kufo, Japan. It's about two 7-year-old boys back in 1975 that had quite an encounter. Very detailed, so check that out. Well, we're ready to go with Dr. George Gaines. I do want to thank everyone, first of all, for supporting the show. I couldn't do it without you. Anyone can do that over at podcastufo.com. You'll see the link. For only $2 or more, you can help us out. And we are ready to go with George Gaines. It's an incredible story. I will be live in chat, so I will be interacting with you there. And let's try to get this thing going. Our guest this evening is Dr. W. George Gaines. He grew up in Pensacola, Florida, and he's lived and worked throughout the United States and Europe. And we're going to talk about a sighting he had, an encounter he had when he was very young and what followed after that. And welcome to the show, George.
Well, thanks, Martin. I'm pleased to be with you tonight.
Thank you. Now, you and I, it's funny, you and I talked on the phone about a whole nother subject, and I came clean and told you I did a show on UFOs. That's how our conversation started.
Right.
Yeah. And so can you give a little bit of background and also you've had a professional career and all that, and it's interesting how this encounter probably changed your way of thinking, didn't it?
It certainly did. And let me just begin by saying that much of the story that I'll tell tonight has been reconstructed over a long period of time. A lot of what I'm going to tell, I didn't know at the time, but it's things that I have found out since then by doing research and follow-up. So people might wonder, well, did you know this at the time? And the answer is no, of course I didn't know. I was a 12-year-old kid. All I knew is what happened that night. And, as an adult, I have tried to follow this as best as I could. And it's only in recent years that I was able to learn more about the sighting.
Oh, you actually learned more. Now, is this... why don't you go into the story, how the whole encounter began and the whole situation?
Sure. Well, we go back to July the 23rd, 1956, Pensacola, Florida. Pensacola, at the time, and still is, the cradle of naval aviation. It's there are many bases there were there back in the 50s, and probably even more than there are today. At least a half a dozen bases where naval aircraft flew in and out regularly. I was born in Pensacola. My father was a naval aviator during the war, and also an instructor, and then he ended up flying heavy bombers in World War II out of England for the Navy. Not too many Navy pilots flew heavy bombers out of England in World War II, but my dad was one of those, and was fortunate enough to survive. I'll come back to him a little bit later because he's an interesting figure in his own right.
Mm-hmm.
So, I grew up in an environment of being extremely familiar with aircraft in the sky, day, night, and I prided myself as a young aviation enthusiast. I mean, my goal was to become a Marine Corps pilot one day. That never happened, but I was very, very interested in aircraft and could identify any aircraft by type and model or so forth. And I was also interested in UFOs. I'll just say that right up front. I remember at a very tender age when the Roswell incident was first publicized. I remember how excited my mother got about it, and she, told me about it. And from the earliest times I can remember, I was interested in astronomy, in the stars, in aircraft, and simply through what I would call logic. I was convinced in my own mind that we were not alone. But I'd never seen anything and was always sort of looking, but never really saw anything other than what was obvious, aircraft flying at night.
George, hang on just a second there. Can we,
Sure.
Before we move on from this, I wanted to ask you, because you don't hear a lot about people talking about Roswell when it happened. So I just wanted to touch on that a little bit. I understand that, the news went out and it was in papers everywhere, and,
Yes.
it was publicized, and then it was, the weather of the balloon the next day, and then nobody talked about it for many, many years. So do you remember hearing about that, and you probably heard the next day that it was just a weather balloon, but did you remember that in your childhood and as you got older, and then when it resurfaced in the late 1980s, you said, "Oh yeah," or something like that? How did that all
Yes.
play out?
I mean, it was a very powerful early memory. I remember a great deal about my early childhood. It's not the blur that some people have, but I'm fortunate to have some very clear memories. I remember when World War II ended, and I was very small at the time. But I remember the Roswell incident being in the paper. I don't remember reading about it, but I know my mother read about it. And then when they came up with the debunking story, my mother was quite a skeptic, and she says, "I think they've just made that up. I think it's a cover-up."
Well,
And so that's my earliest recollection of Roswell. And then, of course, when it's been back in the news, several times. I guess I always believed it was just a cover-up by the government to shield us from the truth. Mm-hmm. So that was my attitude. So at the time of the sighting, I would say that I was certainly receptive and anything but a skeptic. But I was not a child that was subject to wild imaginations. I was very scientific in my orientation, and have had a good career as a behavioral scientist, and so I consider myself a pretty cold-blooded, objective observer. So the way this happened was it was a hot summer night, and I had a little girlfriend that lived down the street, and her parents invited me and her to go out to the airport. And of course, you might say, well, go to the airport, what is that? Well, in Pensacola in 1956, that was about the most exciting thing for kids to do, was to go out to the airport and wait for the occasional aircraft to land, because then you could see them come up and you could feel the prop wash and all that and see the people getting off and people getting on. It was a very exciting thing to do. So we went out to the airport, and I remember that her mother and father were not particularly interested in hanging around with us. They were in the coffee shop there having, I guess, coffee and pie or whatever they were drinking. And so my little girlfriend and I went out to the fence. And the fence was, this is not like an airport today. I mean, it was just a chain link fence. And I can remember, putting my fingers on it and, holding on to the fence and kind of leaning back and forth. And so we were just looking for aircraft to come in and land. And as it turned out, my girlfriend was a year older than me. She was 13, and she had to wear glasses for distance. But she didn't have them on that night, I guess because she was hoping that I might try to kiss her. Well, that was so far from my mind as a 12-year-old. I mean, I just wasn't about to do anything like that. But she didn't, with being, a young lady, she was slightly vain and wanted to appear very, very attractive, which she was and still is. And so we were looking at the fence and looking up at the moon, which was not a crescent moon, but it wasn't a quarter moon either. It was somewhere in between. And there were some stars that were very, very close to the moon. And I commented to her, I said, look at those stars. They're right next to the moon. And so we looked at them for a while, and she said, yeah, I see them. And in fact, she really didn't see anything. So my one witness was worthless, and so I noticed that one of the stars seemed to be getting bigger and bigger. I said, "Wow!" I said, "Look at that. That could be an airplane coming in." But it was stationary. It just never moved. It got bigger and bigger, and all of a sudden, it got so big that it divided into two what appeared to be stars. I said, holy smoke, look at that. There are two of them. And so they remained stationary for at least 5 or 6 minutes without moving. But one became two. And then I said, I believe they're moving to the south, because we were looking eastward. And I said, yes, look, they're both moving together. And then they began to move apart, where one went up and the other remained stationary, more or less flying along the horizon. And so this really got my juices going, because I'd never seen anything quite like this. And then the one on top accelerated rapidly and then took off straight up, just like it was shot out of a cannon. And I'd never seen any aircraft do anything like that. And I was just stunned to see it. And then the second one, the lower one, kept moving straight along the horizon toward the south, toward the Gulf of Mexico, and then it took off at the same rate of speed. And it was just a blur. I mean, it wasn't even fast. It just streaked up and was gone. So that was the sighting. Mm-hmm. And all I can say is that on the way home, we told her parents what we had seen, and they seemed very interested and believed us, because they knew I was not the kind of young man who made up silly stories. And but when I got home, I told my mother about it, and it just was she said, well, make sure you write down everything so you'll remember it. And so I did, and I was in my room making notes and writing it out, and I was so frightened by what I saw. It wasn't, I mean, there was the initial exhilaration, but upon reflection, I realized that I had seen something that was absolutely mind-blowing, and I was afraid. I don't know what I was afraid of. I guess I was afraid that maybe they saw me and knew that I saw them, and that they somehow, I had a feeling that they must have known that I saw this. And so I made detailed notes on everything. And as a young scientist, later when I was in high school, I won the science fair as a sophomore. So that gives you an idea of the kind of notes that I was making even at 12 years of age. So I made very, very detailed notes. And so the next day I told my mother, I said, Mother, I'm going to write a report and send it to the Air Force. And she says, oh, no, you don't want to do that. I said, well, why not? She says, oh, no. She said, that would just create problems. You don't want to do that. Don't do that. So I went ahead and I wrote up a letter, and I consolidated my notes and put it in the best language that I could. And I addressed it to UFO Investigations, Eglin Air Force Base, Florida, and mailed it. We didn't have zip codes in 1956, and Eglin was, figured the post office knew where that was because it's not really in a city. It's just Eglin Air Force Base. And I dropped it in the mail and didn't think anything more about it. Now, less than a week later, it was a Saturday morning, the phone rings. And so my job at the house, since my parents were divorced, so I lived with my mother and my grandmother. And so my job as the man of the house was to always answer the phone, which I did. And a man on the other end said, may I speak to George Gaines? And I said, this is he. He said, is this the same George that lives at such and such an address? I said, yes, it is. And he says, is this the same George who sent a report to the Air Force a few days ago about what you had seen? And I took a deep breath and said, yes, it is. And he says, well, great. He said, George, what are you doing this morning? I said, and so I immediately said, I'm going to the pool to swim, because I was a collegiate swimmer and high school swimmer, and so I was, we're going to go to practice. And I said, I'm going to swim practice. And he said, George, he said, you just sit tight. We'll be right over. And I remember those words so clearly. George, you just sit tight. We'll be right over. It didn't say, can we come by? How do you do? Or anything. We're coming over. So I realized then that I was in a jam, and I had to explain to my mother very quickly what had happened. I said, Mother. I said, she said, who is that? I said, it was a nice man. You remember I said I was thinking about submitting a report to the Air Force? She says, you didn't. I said, yes, I did. And I said, they're coming over. She says, oh, my God. She says, now we're in trouble. We're in trouble. I mean, this is 1956, and, things were different then. It was a different world, and so you didn't file reports or anything unless you had good reason, and I thought I had good reason. So, I told my grandmother, and she says, oh, Lordy, she says, you're in trouble now. I said, well, I told the truth. I didn't make anything up. It's all true. It's all true. And so while we were talking, I mean, this couldn't have been more than 5 minutes from when I hung up, maybe not that long. My grandmother, who used to sit in the living room looking out the window, she says, oh, here they come. And so my mother and I went to the door, and she, saw them. They pulled up in a four-door 1955 or 56. I couldn't tell the exact model. I always thought it was a 55, white Cadillac, air conditioned. It was absolutely spotless. And I remember thinking, why isn't it gray, and why doesn't it have military stencils on it, saying U.S. Air Force or U.S. Navy or something? But it was a civilian car, but it was a beautiful white Cadillac. And it was air conditioned, and that was very unusual because we didn't have air conditioning in our home in Florida. And I never knew anybody who had an air conditioned car until in 1958. So this was quite a rare event. And then out of the car come two Air Force officers, men who were dressed as Air Force officers, who come up and greet me and my mother on the front porch. So why don't I just take a quick pause and say, do you have any questions that you want to ask me at this point before we get into the interview?
No, not really. It's you and I had kind of gone over this in our talk. I think it was, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 months ago. So it's all almost like new coming at me. But I couldn't remember the encounter, what your sighting was to begin with. But just the fact that they came to see you that quickly is pretty interesting.
Well, yes. I didn't think through it very carefully at the time. I was just really scared that they were coming to talk to me because I didn't know what to expect. But the two gentlemen came in, and they showed my mother some identification in addition to their uniforms, and she welcomed them and said, please come in. They said, well, we would like to talk to George about what he saw. And so the two were, it was a captain and a lieutenant. And the captain did not have what I would call a military bearing. He seemed to be sweating a little bit. It was hot. And so he unbuttoned his blouse when he sat down and crossed his legs and made himself very much at home. He just seemed very comfortable. And then the lieutenant was just the opposite. He was buttoned down. He had on I think what you call almost an Eisenhower jacket, as opposed to the captain with the blouse. It was very tight around the waist, and he had a tie on, and he had a crew cut, dark hair with salt and pepper. The captain had longer hair and just seemed more. He seemed more like a civilian dressed up in an Air Force uniform, and so they began the questioning in the living room. And so the captain then asked the lieutenant to go out and, once we agreed to do it, he sent the lieutenant out to the car, and he opened the trunk up and brought all sorts of stuff in. He brought in charts that, were on like a movie screen with flip charts. He brought in a movie screen, a movie projector, and what I remember most vividly was a reel-to-reel woolen sack tape recorder where everything in the interview was being taped. And that thing just ran and ran and ran. So they began, and I don't remember all of what was said or what was asked, but I do remember the captain or the lieutenant standing up like he was giving a military briefing. And he had a pointer stick, and he kept pointing, to these charts of the sky and this, and he was using a lot of technical language like azimuth, perigee, apogee, and stuff that I really was not familiar with. and the captain would kind of interpret for him. He said, "Okay, what the lieutenant is saying is this. George, tell me more about how you saw this." And they, of course, had my report there, which they let me look at. And about that time, I'd say probably an hour into it, my mother had gotten on the phone and called the parents of the young girl who was with me. And it turned out to be a real embarrassment for her because she had nothing to add to it. Now, she had made up a report as well of what she didn't see. And on that report, she doodled and drew a picture of like an alien coming out of a spaceship. It was a cartoon like. And so when they came up there, the captain saw that, and he just grabbed it and took it out of range. He said, "I'll take that." And so, he had that. She stayed around for about 15 minutes and listened and couldn't really add anything because she didn't see anything. And then they asked her to go ahead. She could go back home. So then they got out some films and showed me films. Now some of the films I remember having seen before, and it was like, lights and it was daytime scenes of maybe 4 or 5 lights flying together, or what could be interpreted as UFOs. And they kept asking me, "Is this what you saw? You see something like that?" I said, "Well, no, mine weren't doing that. It was just 2." And I really stuck to my story because Martin. That's the only story I had, and I didn't know what else to do other than stick to the story.
Now, this is kind of curious. They were showing you films.
Yes, they had films.
And were there some really good films too of some UFOs?
They were decent. They were decent. Of stuff. Some stuff I'd seen in books before. Or magazines that had been published. So I kept thinking, well, I've seen all this before. And he said, "You ever seen this?" I said, "Well, I've seen it. I've seen something like that in a magazine, but some I had not seen." And so after we got through with the movies, I guess it was around lunchtime. Well, these guys didn't stop for lunch, and my mother and grandmother, particularly my grandmother, she was very nosy and kept walking into the room and walking out of the room and in and out like she thought I was going to be molested or something. So finally they told my mother, they said, "Look, we'd like to question George now in private.
Wow.
Do you have another place where we can go?" And she said, "Yeah, we have a den, a small den." We went in there and set up shop, and they closed and locked the door to keep them out. So the interrogation, and my grandmother said, "Well, the poor child hasn't eaten." He said, "Well, we'll let him have something to eat when we're finished." So we went into the den, and they brought in some scrapbooks, what I'd call scrapbooks. They were, I guess, big notebooks, big ones. And so he says, "Okay, I'm going to show you some pictures." And so these were, pictures of UFOs, photographs, some sketches, and, did it look like this? It looked like, I said, "Wow, that's pretty interesting there." I said, "No, it didn't." He said, "Look like that?" "No, it didn't look like that. I'm telling you, it was just a light in the sky, just a very bright light in the sky, and it was moving slow, and then it moved really fast." So went on, and I went through several of these books. And finally, there was another book there, and I figured once we get through the last book, these guys will leave, because I was really, really getting tired of telling the same story over and over again. And then they would stop me and say, "Okay, George, let's go back. Tell me from the very beginning what you saw." And so they must have had me repeat my story 4 or 5 times during this whole episode.
Do you think they were trying to see if you would trip up a little or something?
Yeah, I think they just, were, it's like the cops. I mean, they're trying to see, he tells the same story over and over again, and so finally, then the captain began to make suggestions, and he said, "Now, when the craft got close, could you see any portholes?" I said, "I don't know how close it got, but it wasn't close enough that I could see any detail." He says, "Okay, so when the craft got close, could you see anybody looking out of a porthole?" I said, I just said, "No, it didn't get that close." And then you go on, and then he'd come back and say, "Now, George, when the craft landed, did a door open?" I said, "The craft didn't land. I wish it had. I wish I could say it did, but it didn't. It just flew off, and it flew off at a very high rate of speed." So, he went through all this highly suggestive questioning, and finally, I said, he's got to show me this last book. I said, "Are you going to show me what's in? When are you going to show me what's in the last scrapbook?" He said, "Well, George, you said you didn't see anybody, right?" I said, "Right, I didn't." He said, "Well," he says, I'm not so sure you didn't." And I said, "I didn't." And he says, "Well, I'll show you what's in here anyhow." And so when we went through this book was filled with pictures and sketches of aliens.
Really?
All kinds. I mean, ridiculous looking. Some I'd seen in comic books. I said, "Oh, I've seen that. I've seen that in a comic book." He said, "Okay, next one." And then he showed me a picture. I remember it very, very distinctly because my eyes must have just lit up like a cheap pinball machine. Looked like an alien laying on an examining table. Kind of like, I guess when I saw the Alien Autopsy, movie, I said, "Whoa, that looks a lot like what the captain showed me." I mean, I was probably 40 or 50 years old when I saw that for the first time. And I said, "Well, I've seen that before." So I asked him, I said, "Whoa, is that real?" And he looked at me and kind of smiled. He said, "Does it look real to you?" I said, "It looks real to me." "Is it?" And he just wouldn't answer. And then we got to the end of the book, and he says, "Okay, George, we're done. Thank you so much." Thanked my mother, and it was about 3:00 in the afternoon, and he and the lieutenant got in their Cadillac and left. Now, a lot of reconstruction has gone on since then. This was, a long time ago. The one thing that was said as they were leaving, my mother asked the captain, "Do you all investigate every sighting from a 12-year-old boy? You must be getting hundreds of these." He says, "Ma'am," he says, "we get thousands of these reports." He said, "But this report was very interesting to us. We wanted to talk to George because he was very thorough in his documentation. We believe every word he said. And to be honest, we had some corroborating information from other sources to corroborate the sighting. So we wanted to hear his story." And he said, "The only thing I would ask you is I would advise you, I can't order you," he said, "but I would advise you strongly never to discuss this with anyone."
Now, did
I never talked.
Did he actually say this to you, or was that to your mother?
It was to my mother, but I heard it.
Uh-huh.
And it was spoken really to both of us. And so I never discussed it until I was probably in my late 40s.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I was silent for over 30 years before I said anything about it.
Wow. And one of the things we left out, you're probably going to bring it up, is who one of the gentlemen were.
That's right. I didn't know who these guys were, and in the in the late 1980s, early 1990s, of course, we had the famous Gulf Breeze sightings in the Pensacola area. And my oldest daughter was very, very interested in this, and she became an active member of the MUFON chapter there in Pensacola. And she begged me to come to a meeting and tell the story. And I said, Beth, I'm not going to do it. Just not going to do it. And so finally it was at Christmas time, and she said, would you at least come to the Christmas party? They're having a nice Christmas party. So I went to the party, and it was really, really a nice affair. A lot of people were there. And one of the guys I knew asked me about it. He said, your daughter told me something about the sighting. I said, yeah. He said, there are a couple of Air Force guys here who would really like to meet you and talk to you. So these guys were probably 20 years older than me, I guess, at the time. So they must have been probably late 60s, early 70s. And so I learned a great deal about them. And I told them the story. They said, well, number one, Eglin Air Force Base had no investigating authority. These guys did not come from Eglin. Number two, they most likely came down from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio because they were the primary investigators. And number three, they may not even have been Air Force. They may have been CIA or NSA because a lot of the investigators were wearing military uniforms during these investigations that went on in Project Blue Book in the later years. So all of that is partially true because I found out through the internet by looking at pictures. When I saw the picture of Captain Edward Ruppelt, who was the head of Blue Book until 1953, I said, there he is. That's who came to see me. I would know him anywhere. Slightly pudgy, chubby cheeks, just a charming individual to talk to, and he must have been a special guy because for a captain, somebody with the rank of captain, to have that kind of authority, he must have been just a remarkable officer. I mean, he had a distinguished combat record in Korea and so forth, and distinguished himself in every way. But he was evidently a superb manager, and that's why he was given the Blue Book assignment. Now, he had retired in 1953. He was no longer in the Air Force. He was out. And he took a job as a consulting engineer, aeronautical engineer, with North American Aviation out in California, and was living in California at the time in 1956.
So do you think they flew him all the way to Florida to talk to you?
Yes. Yes, I do.
Amazing.
He collaborated with Blue Book after he left. And I don't know how many investigations he did, but now his book was first published in August of 1956. So he was already working on a revision. And, he may have wanted this material for his revision. How he found out about the sighting, I'm sure that, he was in regular contact with the Blue Book staff. The lieutenant turned out to be a Lieutenant Robert Olson. I don't know if Olson had retired or not. He was a little bit younger, but I found his photograph on the internet with Ruppelt, and they were there together looking at some charts, and I said, whoa, there's the second guy. I'd know him anywhere. So I only found out their identities perhaps 6 months ago when I was doing this research. And I was thrilled to do this because, I always wondered, who were these guys? Who are these guys that came to see me? Now, maybe Ruppelt was in Wright-Patterson on an assignment when something happened, when he got the report and decided to fly down to Pensacola. but they didn't drive over. I mean, they probably flew into NAS Pensacola and got the rental car and from an admiral or something, and came on out to see me. But Captain Ruppelt had suffered a heart attack earlier that year, and I suspect that, to me, he just looked uncomfortable, like he was sweating, and he never went out to the car to bring anything in. He just stayed in a chair the whole time, and Olson went out and got everything and brought it in. Of course, he was the lower-ranking officer, and I guess that would explain it. But it seemed that he was a bit fatigued, and then, of course, we know tragically Captain Ruppelt died of a heart attack in 1960. His wife lived out in California. I believe she passed away the late 1990s or right around 2000. Captain Ruppelt had a brother who lived in the Sarasota area, not far from me, but he passed, I believe, in 2010. So Edward Ruppelt was one heck of a fine officer, outstanding career, raised in, I believe, in Nebraska or Iowa, somewhere in the Corn Belt area, and just was just an outstanding young man and student in college, and engineer. And, when you read about him, you can't help but admire him. And I certainly enjoyed my 7 or 8 hours of working with him on this little project that I created. He was a total gentleman, and we developed really an excellent rapport during that time. Lieutenant Olson was always in the background, so I never had much of a chance to develop a relationship with him. But with Ruppelt, it was special. And like I said, the minute I saw his picture on the internet, I didn't even know who it was. I said, that's the guy. There he is. And then I did the background research on him.
Yeah. And how about his book? Is like one of the according to Alejandro Rojas, who was just on with the news, he thinks it's the best book on UFOs ever written.
I would say it certainly was. He was amazingly forthcoming in the book. I mean, he didn't. It was not an effort to debunk at all. It was a very open-minded, objective look at it, and he went into a great deal to report on some of the investigations that they had done. However, the word got out through channels that the government or the Air Force was not pleased with the book. At first, they said, yeah, it's a very good book and all that, but back channel information was delivered to Ruppelt that it was not something they were happy with, and they wanted him to put out a revision. And so a revised edition came out, I think, about a year and a half later. And in the revised edition, he took a different view. He basically, it was just one section at the end where he just kind of said, well, it's just all imagination. And then he died in 60. Now, there's been, stuff on the internet. Some people that knew him and lived there said that one woman, I think she may still be alive. She was 95 a couple of years ago. Said that she was a neighbor of theirs, and that her husband and Ed Ruppelt rode to work together every day. And what their work was, she said she didn't know because they never, ever discussed it. She said, but she always believed, and her husband believed, that Ruppelt was murdered.
Really?
And that he did not die of natural causes.
Well, you said earlier he had a heart attack.
Yes.
Huh.
Yeah, had the heart attack in '56, and then fatal heart attack or whatever in '60.
Yeah.
37 years old.
So he was 32 years old when he had his first heart attack, which is very young.
Very, very young.
Yeah. Wow. Amazing. So
His brother passed away. I think his slightly younger brother. I think he was in his upper 80s, 87. 88.
yeah, so it's just there's longevity in his family, but it didn't happen with him.
No, he didn't.
So have you now? Was this case part of? Let's see. Was it Grunt Project? What am I thinking of?
It's in Blue Book.
It is in Blue Book. This case is.
Yes. Yes, it is. Now, interestingly enough, about 5 years ago, when I'd attempted to go up to Montgomery, Alabama, where they had the archives, and when I finally got somebody that could talk, they said, "Oh, well, that's all now in Washington, D.C." I said, "Oh, great." So I gave up on that, but then I somehow I found out that the archives were now online, and I found what's called I'm not sure what the Air Force nomenclature is, but it's 10073. That's the form number. I guess they call it 10073. All the reports are filed on that form number. I actually found that, and I wish that I had made a copy of it, but I didn't. I found it and read the report. It was a brief synopsis, but there were no field notes or anything else attached. And the conclusion was that I had witnessed, it didn't give my name, but it said, I think it said 12-year-old, blah, 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 Pensacola, that I had witnessed a mid-air refueling operation. I thought that was a pretty clever way of explaining it, and that would have worked fine, except when the two separated, they don't do that. So that was the explanation, but no field notes were attached. Since that time, I've gone back to Blue Book archives, and I have searched exhaustively. And all I can find is a reference to the date, a reference to just that there was a sighting and in Pensacola, Florida, that date, and it says case missing.
Missing?
Case missing.
How about that? So you actually saw it at one time, and then it's gone.
As God is my witness, I saw it. And showed it to my wife and kids. They all saw it. We all saw it, read it together. I said, well, that's kind of a downer because, at least they could have said it was unexplained. But no, I mean, that was the explanation, which I guess is plausible. And they said that it was the refueling was over Tyndall Air Force Base in Panama City, which is about 105 miles away by the Crow. It's pretty far away to see lights pretty darn close. So,
wow.
Evidently they had seen something. I don't know whether it was radar, visual, civilian, military sighting, but somebody had seen something that really, really tweaked their interest. I've talked to, some experts back in the 90s, guys that are, are part of the regular talk show group, and they basically say, well, your sighting is nothing. I mean, all you saw were night lights, and that's nothing. That wouldn't have justified them coming out. There must have been some other reason why they came out. And when you consider that it was Ed Ruppelt himself and Robert
Olson.
Olson, two of the mainstays in the organization, that they came almost 3 years after Ruppelt was out in a civilian. You know, he still had his uniform, I guess, but wow. I mean, what prompted it?
Now, you mentioned earlier that there was some corroboration. In other words, someone else had seen this. Obviously, did you happen to notice? Was that noted anywhere as well?
No,
it wasn't.
No, and there was no other sighting in the area around those dates.
So it kind of make you wonder if you're trying to put together puzzle pieces. Maybe someone saw the encounter, even the sighting, even closer. Maybe someone saw it earlier, and there was a landing. Trying to figure out why they would try to lead you into telling them that the thing landed.
He was very, very leading in that regard. And I remember feeling great discomfort, like I should be telling him, you know, that it had landed, but I couldn't because it hadn't. I mean, I had to stick to my story, which was the only story I had, which was what I saw.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned your parents were divorced at that time, but were you in touch with your father? Did you talk to him about this?
Only in later life, and that's an interesting part of the story. I got to know my dad really, really well in my 40s, and we became great friends and devoted to each other up until the time of his death in the 90s. But after World War II, as I said, my dad flew B-24s, heavy bombers, over England. He was not part of the 8th Air Force, but flew with the 8th Air Force. Those guys got to fly 25 missions if they survived. Of course, I think the average was about 6 or 7 missions, and then the pilots, you know, that's how long they lived. I'm not sure how many missions my dad flew, but he was there for a couple of years, and he didn't get to go home. He was originally sent to Europe to fly anti-submarine warfare, but we had no technology for doing that. But at the end of the war, he was sent to Topeka, Kansas, to a secret training operation where they had developed, I guess, what we'd call a laser-guided or smart bomb. They would drop 3 buoys and triangulate on a submarine. And so he told me, he said, look, he says, you know, I came home from the war with a pocket full of medals. And he said, but I have 2 accomplishments that I was very proud of. One, I never lost a crewman. He was shot down twice. Wow. But crashed twice, but never lost a crewman. Jeez. And he said the second, and what I was most proud of, was when I came back from Kansas, I sunk a German U-boat this was after the war was over. It was a rogue U-boat. He said, I sunk a U-boat in a PBY, and he said, we dropped, you know, he said, we were out, we were near the end of our mission. We were running low on fuel, and we spotted periscope, and so he said, my co-pilot said, "Hey, Bill, let's head on back." He said, "No, I can't." He says, "There's a whole flotilla of hospital ships going back." He says, that U-boat's going to have its way with them if we don't stop it. So he dropped the 3 buoys and then got a fix on the U-boat and dropped the bomb that went, or the torpedo that went to it. And they could actually hear it. He says, I could hear the baffles collapsing. I could hear the screams on board, and I knew that we had sunk that U-boat. Wow. Because then it went all quiet. And he said, that's my proudest accomplishment. He said, I took a lot of lives with a lot of bombs of people that didn't need to die. He said, but I saved a lot of lives of American GIs who were coming back. So I just offer that story to give you a little insight into my dad. He was an engineer as well, and like Captain Ruppelt, and maybe I saw a little bit of my dad and Captain Ruppelt, or kind of wanted that dad figure, is why I liked him so much. But in having adult conversation with my dad about it, I asked him, I said, Dad, did you ever see anything when you were flying, any UFOs? He says, oh, you mean Foo Fighters? I said, yeah. My goodness. He said, yeah, they flew, they flew with us all the time. I said, really? He says, oh yeah, they on almost every mission they were flying with us. I said, well, did they ever attack or anything? No, they just flew like escorts. And he was very matter of fact about it, just like, and so I later found out that when working as a civilian at Fort Rucker, where he was chief of air safety as a civilian, he actually, we believe, can't prove, we think pretty sure he worked for the CIA, and I always wondered if with his secret stuff that he was doing, he never left the military. I mean, he was out of the military, but he never, I think, like Ed Ruppelt, he was just part of that clandestine service and never really left. So I wondered if when they saw my name, if that triggered it, what's this? Is this guy the son of this guy? Does he, But my mother said it never came up, with Captain Ruppelt, that he never asked, how's your husband doing or anything like that. So that's probably, a false lead. But I often wondered if that were the case.
Wow.
And I asked my dad also. I said, Dad, if UFOs are real and the government knows, I said, how can that be kept a secret? And he looked at me. He says, I'll tell you this. He says, and don't you ever ask me that again. He says, they tell you that if you ever tell about this, that you will be killed, and so will every member of your family.
What?
He said, that's how secrets are kept. He says, don't ever ask me again.
So, do you think he was exaggerating, or do you think...
Not this man. No.
Wow.
No, no exaggeration, and not an exaggerating bone in this guy's body.
Wow, amazing. So the Foo Fighters, when you read about that or you hear about that, they had no idea. According to most, there was no idea what they were. There was speculation that they could have been from the Germans, or what did he think? Did he talk about what he thought they were?
Not really. He considered them to be friendly. Said they were not hostile, and they flew with us. They're like escorts, and we were glad they were there. And it's almost like they guided us. I think he said something like, it's almost like they helped us find our targets. It was just, but he talked about that very freely. But once we got into the subject of UFOs and secrets, boy, did the door ever close. And he says, I can talk about the Foo Fighters because everybody knew about that. He said, I'm not talking out of school, but he had, my dad had cardiac arrest when he was, I think, 60 years old and survived it. But when he went to University of Alabama, Birmingham, to have his quintuple bypass, there were 2 FBI agents in the operating room with him.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, they would not let him be sedated without the FBI there. So that's the kind of secret clearance he had.
Wow, amazing. So when the thing that just to continue a little bit on the Foo Fighters again, the speculation is, why did they only happen during World War II? You didn't hear about them afterwards, and some people. I'm not saying this is my thoughts at all, but some people have speculated that it's a time travel situation, that people are focusing on historic events. Now, I don't know if I buy into that in any type of way or not, but it's very interesting that just seemed to happen during the war, and then you didn't hear about it after. It was like gone.
That's right. I mean, where did the Foo Fighters go? Why were they just in Northern Europe? I don't think they were ever. Perhaps they were recorded in Southern Europe and Italy and Greece and places like that, but they were definitely in Northern Europe where my dad was flying, and he said I saw them all the time. They were always there.
Now, a lot of people are saying that they were similar to orbs, and some said they were green, and they're different colors. Did he go into detail? I know this is probably a little redundant for you, but did he go into detail about them?
Not really. Really. He just called them Foo Fighters, and it was they were like, he said, they were like, flew with us in formation like escorts. So it was sort of the impression I had from him was they weren't just buzzing around, but they were kind of flying. I guess like if you look out on the wing and you see a light out there on your, on the end of your wing or a landing light, it's just like seeing a light out there. It's just flying with them. Most of my dad's flying was at night.
Oh, really? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So going back to this, all the way back to the encounter you had and back to the visit from Ruppelt and Owens. Olson. I mean, it is very unusual that they would spend, for lights in the sky, basically, that they would spend 7 or 8 hours in the home. Now, you said you felt comfortable, but when they wanted to speak to you alone, that must have been, for a young kid, you must have felt a little uncomfortable, I would think.
Actually not. Ruppelt was so warm and engaging that he was just like, it was like we'd become friends, and so I trusted him and didn't, Olson, I'm not so sure I trusted him. I mean, because he was always talking above my head, so to speak, and it just didn't seem to have the same degree of empathy, but whether perhaps he wasn't even interested in the case, but Ruppelt clearly was interested in wanting to get all the information he could. But no, I was pretty relaxed by then, and I was wanting to end it. I mean, I was ready to. I mean, the day was shot, and I obviously wasn't going to get to the pool, so I just wanted to get the heck out of there and finish up.
Yeah. Wow. So as you moved on, you said you didn't really talk about this for 40 years, but did you keep a keen interest in UFOs?
Oh yes. Always. kept up with it, would read about it, occasionally buy a book about, and so I've kept up with it all along, and I'm certainly don't consider myself an expert. I'm not ready to, I'm not interested in going on the tour or going to any conferences or anything like that. I'm happy to talk to you and the audience about it tonight and share it, because it's my story, and it's the same story I told Captain Ruppelt, 50 however many years ago, 55 or more years ago. 60 years ago, is it?
60,
I
yeah.
guess it is. 60 years ago. It's still a very, very vivid memory. I've done some work on trying to reconstruct things through visualization. I've gone back and found old pictures of the airport, how it used to look. The house, of course, that we lived in is no longer there. It's bulldozed years ago. But I've gone back and tried to sketch the floor plan and to look at some old pictures of the house inside and out, and trying to sort of reconstruct the events. My youngest daughter, Laura, who I think you may have spoken to in the past, Laura's an excellent artist, and she can do anything in drawing. So we're working on a collaboration, what I'd call sort of not a comic book, because it's not funny, but an illustrated view of what happened. So there would be pictures of scenes, all the scenes that I remember vividly, to try to, get her to describe. I would describe it, get her to draw it, and then we would have a narrative that goes with that. And that's just for my own amusement, really. But I think that my doctorate's in educational psychology, and I know that visualization is very, very important to learning and to memory. We're getting a thunderstorm here. I don't know if you heard the clap of thunder there, but it just cracked. So creating those images helps to bring back some of the details, and I found that my memory seems to improve with the visualization of the different scenes of where we were, and I've got some pretty good embedded visuals of it, and because I've thought about it, I may not have told the story a lot over the years, but I've thought about it many, many times, and it's because not just of the visit, but of what caused the visit, the sighting itself. That was just very, very powerful and thrilling to see something like that, because I've never seen anything like it since.
Have you had any type of sighting at all since that time?
One or two nights when we were living in Pensacola in the early 90s, my wife and I went out with the MUFON group. They would go out to the Pensacola Bay Bridge and look, and we did see a moving light. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't nearly as impressive as what I saw when I was 12. And some of the people, said they saw a lot of things, and I'm sure some of them did. But I try to remain a healthy skeptic, and if it's somebody I know and believe, I've had some folks that I've known and worked with over the years that I believe, and when they tell me they saw something, I think there are probably a lot of people like me who have seen things that just never really talk about it.
Yeah, that's true. I'm sure it's a large percentage. I forgot to mention that if anyone's listening live and they would like to call in, and ask our guest a question, you're welcome to do that. That's 603-967-4030. So during the late 1980s, the Gulf Breeze incident, you all right?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. A lot of people claim that was a hoax, or part of it was a hoax. Some of it was possibly. Were you paying attention to that when it was going on?
I certainly did. Of course, we didn't know who Ed was until much later. And then, much to my surprise, it turned out to be Ed Walters, and I knew Ed Walters.
He was like a real estate developer or something, right?
Yeah, a builder. Very, very nice guy, and just a regular businessman. We shared the same CPA. The CPA and I were fraternity brothers. We've known each other for years, and I talked to him about it, and he says Ed is just as level-headed as anybody, and so. It's hard to know. Fenner McConnell, who was the medical examiner there in Escambia County, really a wonderful person and outstanding physician, he had seen, and when Fenner spoke, I mean, you knew this is. Can't say it on the air, but he's a no-nonsense guy. He wouldn't make it up. There's no way Fenner McConnell would ever make anything up. And his sister lived in Mississippi, and she had a sighting about the same time. And she was visited by some men in black, and they threatened her. And when Fenner told that story, I believed him. I absolutely believed him. Sadly, Fenner was accidentally killed. He was a great jogger and was jogging across the Bob Sykes Bridge one day, and I guess somebody just wasn't looking where they were going and ran him down and killed him. But so there was some people in that group that I went to elementary and high school with, and that I've known all my life. And these are people that don't lie and don't make up stories. I mean, this is Pensacola is the Deep South, and that kind of people that make up tall tales, they're ostracized. And so when these guys come out and say they saw something, you better believe they're telling the truth. That they saw something they couldn't explain. Now, there may be an explanation for it besides aliens operating equipment. But I mean, there were a lot of stories that popped up there. A lot of stories that popped up.
Yeah.
And so that was a fascinating time. People would say, "Oh, well, it's just mass hysteria and all that." But
yeah, I mean, you hear of Ed Walters, but there was also a lot of people that were witnessing something going on.
Prominent people, prominent people in the community. I mean, one guy I know is an Eagle Scout, and this guy would never tell a lie.
Well, here's the thing that seems to happen, because I understand when someone bought Ed Walters' house, they found a model of the craft up underneath some insulation in the attic when they were changing the heating system. So what seems to happen, and I've seen this and talked about it before, is that yes, someone does have a sighting. It's monumental to them. And then time goes on, and they're trying to keep it alive or keep themselves in the news or whatever it is, and then they seem to go wrong. This seems to happen to a number of people. where someone will either hoax or exaggerate a story just to keep the spotlight on them, on themselves. So I can only speculate that's what happened with Ed, but I don't really know.
I don't either, and I can't be the judge of that. Nor do I want to be, but there were enough other people though that that had credible sightings that make me believe that at least part of what Ed said he saw was real. So whether, what pressures he felt after that, I don't know. I'm sure it must have been extensive. But
yeah. So you've gone this long. You're paying attention to what's going on in the UFOs. There's actually a symposium coming up. We were talking about earlier with Alejandro in Florida coming up this year. It's a real good one. Have you, I know you mentioned you went to the Christmas party, but have you ever attended any type of UFO convention of any type?
Never have.
Well, it's going to be a good one this year. I just can't remember where it is in Florida, but it's in August. A lot of really good speakers there. So what do you think? I always like to kind of get people's different opinion. What do you think they are? Do you think it's possible that these are extraterrestrial visitations, or what are your thoughts?
I think it's probably today what people are seeing is probably some kind of reverse engineered craft that we've managed to fly, or maybe not even reverse engineered. Maybe it's just something, in the skunk works that we came up with that looks really weird.
Mm-hmm.
When we first saw the stealths, I mean, it was kind of like, whoa, look at that. But the old sightings, the sighting that I saw in 1956, and the sightings back then, those had to be. I mean, they were not Russians. They were not our secret planes flying around, because we didn't have anything to do that, and really, we still don't have anything that I know of that can do that. So, I believe that at least the older sightings were extraterrestrial in nature. That's just the best guess, I think. I think it's the most logical guess. And I say that without any emotion or titillation. I just really think that's probably the best guess. That we hadn't been alone. Now, how long they've been coming here or whatever, who knows? And but I suspect that it's more than just idle curiosity. I mean, they're here. If they're here, they're here for a reason. If they're not communicating with us in a public sense, then there's a reason for that.
I brought this up probably about 5 or 6 times on the show out of 200 some odd episodes, and that is I spoke to someone years ago that told me they were part of the Air Force that was investigating UFOs during Vietnam, and which wasn't supposed to be happening. Anyway, the bottom line is, I asked him why were they, what are they and why are they here? And he said because we're a petri dish. And I mean, it was just like a blunt statement like that, like we're being observed. So I just thought it was an interesting statement, whether he was BSing or telling the truth. It's still an interesting thought.
Well, there's some pretty smart guys in academia that are, let's just say, a little bit out of the mainstream, because mainstream science is extremely conservative and non-risk taking. But there are some very bright rebels that believe, and I happen to share this belief, that our DNA has been modified. That the whole theory of evolution is something I personally don't find much scientific merit for it, or logic for it. Homo sapiens.
When it comes to humans, I agree with you.
Yeah. When it comes to Homo sapiens, we appeared very, very rapidly.
Yes.
About 120,000 years ago.
It doesn't make any sense. I've said that. I know this is a show about UFOs, but I've said that a couple of times. It just seems so quickly as far as evolution to develop like this.
I mean, how it was done, who knows? Is it a completely new species that was introduced from somewhere, or is it a genetic modification? Who knows how it was done? And we'll probably never know in our lifetime, and I'm not sure it makes any difference. But the extinction of Neanderthal, and did Homo sapiens just simply are we just vicious killers that put these guys out? Or did we interbreed with them? Or it just happened too quickly, and they can hypothesize all they want, but I just think it's foolishness. I mean, it's a much better explanation to think that we are in essence an experiment, and But mainstream science, boy, they just they can't handle it because they would be wrong. Everything they've learned would be wrong.
Yeah, they don't want to rewrite the textbooks.
No, it would be humiliating, and their arrogance is unbelievable. So.
Yeah, I know you hear a lot about how that there are discoveries in archaeology that don't make any sense, and you just don't hear about them. There's a question up on the message board. Someone wants to know: do you ever go sky watching now?
Occasionally, I do. I mean, when I go out at night, I always look around, but I haven't seen anything in about 25 years. So I'm not looking for anything, but
well,
if I saw something, it would be great. But
yeah,
I've had my moment. I had my surprise, and
age 12.
That's enough.
Yeah,
enough for a lifetime.
Well, it's since I've had my sighting, which was only in 2006, I am constantly looking to the sky, and I think that's unlike, an average person. Once you have a sighting, I think it just kind of changes the way you think about things, and also changes the way you observe. Because I think, the average person is not really even looking up in the sky too much.
I would agree. When I say, I had my moment 60 years ago, I kind of feel like I had enough. I mean, I don't need to see anything else. It might frighten me too bad.
Yeah. You do
I
hear.
was really frightened. I was really, really scared as a 12-year-old. Really scared.
Well, it's a new paradigm. Basically, when you see something like that, then everything changes. I mean, not to everybody. You know, I've talked to people that have had major sightings, and they never think about it. Like, it just isn't. They don't really care. You know, I mean, it surprises the heck out of me because I think it's probably one of the most important questions to be answered.
I agree. You know, my sighting was certainly not. For me, it was very exciting. But when you put it among all the sightings that, you know, where people have actually seen a craft low, you know, at a low level or in a field or you know, come over the house or you know, I mean, mine just pales by comparison. And certainly I would love to see something like that, but I've seen enough to know that they're real. And to me, the rest is just a matter of common sense and logic. That we're not alone. There, you know, are there more than one type out there? I mean, if there's one type, there's more than one. And are we being visited by more than one? Probably so. And will they ever make themselves known to us? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe in the past they have made themselves known, and that knowledge was lost. Certainly, at some of the old art that's, you know, found from, you know, thousands of years ago makes you wonder if they really didn't have some serious contact with these folks.
Yeah, there was a question that came up on the message board. Someone wanted to know, what is your thoughts on the ancient alien theories?
Probably so. I mean, if they're here, if they, you know, did they just show up in 47?
Yeah.
For the first time? I don't think so.
Right.
Well, there were sightings all around before that. So when you go back, you can find them. So how long have they been coming? Probably a long, long time.
Yeah.
Long
Jacques Vallée and another author put together a book fairly recently that is about ancient sightings, which is, I would really like to read that. That's very fascinating to me. And yeah, if they're visiting now, they could have been visiting a million years ago. Who knows? Doesn't really matter that much.
They absolutely could have, and who knows what they look like. I mean, some of the pictures I saw, I don't know where Ed Ruppelt got them, but there were some pretty scary critters that he showed me pictures of, and I didn't ever want to meet them. I can tell you that.
Now, when you were, let's going back to that, we have a lot of people that are just joining the show now, and so going back to that, this was a notebook that you were shown, and would you say that there were a lot of pictures of so-called aliens, and some of them were just abstracts from comic books and things like that?
Yeah, it was a real mix.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it kind of looked like Creature from the Black Lagoon or something like that, or Lizard Man, and some looked more like insects, and some just didn't look like anything. But I do remember the little guy, gray fella, on the table, and that was a vivid image in my mind, and
especially
so
in 1956. I don't think there was
never
anything.
seen that before.
Yeah, that wasn't really being shown. You know, not like the alien autopsy film that was a hoax or anything like that. You know, this is going back.
But even though it was a hoax, it was darn close to what he had a picture of.
Is that right? Wow. Yeah.
It was strange, very, very strange. But my whole family is interested in the subject matter. Both my daughters and my son have you know, seen things in the sky that they thought were were there. They've, we don't have any evidence or photographs or anything like that, but they're very open to the idea, and I think because we raised them to be open-minded and to the possibility that this is what we perceive to be reality may not be quite exactly what we suppose it is. So they have been part of the story. I mean, I shared the story with them, of course, and that's how my daughter, I guess, got me to come out of the closet, so to speak, and be open about it.
How old was your daughter when you told her, the one that has interests in in UFOs and MUFON and all that? How old was she when you told her the story?
Let's see, she was not in college yet, so she must have been in high school. Must have been like a senior in high school when we went to the Christmas party that was held by MUFON. So she was the youngest person in the MUFON group, and really that was very fortunate, because I don't know if I ever would have really opened up about it. But meeting the other people and that were involved in it was really insightful and helpful to me to recognize what had happened. And it was not just a quirk of fate, but and the subsequent research that I've done by being able to thank goodness again for the internet, that I was able to recognize and identify the two officers who came to see me.
Someone wanted to know earlier, they had a message up on the board, wanted to ask you if you were 100% sure that's who it was.
100%. 100%.
Wow. Yeah. Amazing.
I would say, as far as Lieutenant Olson, the guy I saw the picture of is a dead ringer. Now, there's only one picture of Olson I could ever find on anywhere, so I don't have all that. Ruppelt has multiple pictures at different stages of his career, and so when I say it was Ed Ruppelt, ain't no doubt in my mind that was him. It was him. No question. No question in my mind.
Yeah. Well, this has been really interesting. We still have a little while to go here, but I think one of the most interesting parts of your story is your father, that basically when he was threatened to never talk about UFOs, I mean, it must have really sparked your curiosity enough to want to, get more information out of him.
It did, but he made it clear that that was a closed area, and we weren't going to go there in discussions. But he was kind of a spooky guy, and he just never talked much about anything until late in life. And he never talked about what he did during the war very much. Typical of that generation, the great generation.
Oh yeah.
We were doing our jobs and that was it. Well, they were doing more than just jobs. These were remarkable people, and how he survived. Two plane crashes where
amazing.
Basically they were shot down, but he was a real tough guy.
Hmm.
Purple Heart, wounded. I mean, he said, "Oh yeah, we were all shot up." Kind of like, "Oh yeah, we all got shot, but we took our lumps, but we didn't. I never lost anybody."
Wow.
And he was really, really proud of that. He said everybody wanted to fly with him. In fact, in 12 O'Clock High, the movie, there was an incident where I think they had the chaplain or somebody was smuggled on board. Because they always wanted to see the bombs drop, and they had a rough time or almost got shot down or whatever it was, and that actually happened to my dad when they were on a bombing mission, and they were shot up pretty bad by between the flak and the Messerschmitts. He said they were down to 2 engines and just limping. And he said he went on the PA and he said, "Okay, guys," he says, we got 3 choices. One, he says, we can bail out now and be prisoners of war. 2, we can fly to get to the channel and try to ditch in the channel and hope they'll pick us up. Or 3, we can just hold on for dear life and try to get back to dry land. And he said it was unanimous, loud vote, get us back home. They didn't want to jump out. They didn't want to ditch. They wanted to get back home. Well, he said when they came across the coast of England, actually I think he said they were up north in Scotland, he said we were about 100 feet above the tree line. And he says, no way were we getting back to base. So he said, I was going to have to put it down. And he said, it was a big old swampy area. He said, so I said, looking, he said, I got to find me 2 big trees. And so he went between 2 big trees so it would shear off the wings. Jeez. And the fuselage would just go forward. And so he said, just as we came in, I told everybody, I said, okay, hold on and duck. And he said, the co-pilot and the navigator and I ducked, and he says, a good thing we did because the water from the swamp blew the windshield over their heads. It would have decapitated them. Jeez. Had they been looking up. And he said, of course, the whole plane was filled with water and mud, but it stopped. He said pretty quickly, and they had, I believe. I never can remember, it was 11 or 12 man crew, but let's just say for the sake of argument, it's 11 man crew. So he said they had a drill that they had worked on. That if they ever had that happen, everybody would get out and assemble about 50 meters in front of the fuselage, in front of the nose. So he said everybody kind of bailed out. Of course, they had no communications because everything was shot, and so he said. They all piled out, and everybody seemed to be okay. And he looked at everybody, and everybody was coated in mud. He said it was like a minstrel show. He said it's like we're all dark. And so he counted. He said, okay, let's count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He counted all the way 11, 12. No, that can't be right. So I'm gonna count one more time. One. Yeah, they had an extra one on board. So he counted again in 11, 12. So he pulls out his Colt 45 and says, "Don't anybody move. We got a freaking saboteur on board." And this one guy said, Commander Gaines, it's me, so and so. He says, the guy snuck me on. And so he told him, he said, I always wanted to go on a mission because all I did was load the bombs, and I wanted to see what happened. He says, goodness. I promise. He says,
a stowaway.
Don't court-martialed. I'll never do it again. So my dad said, okay, don't ever do it. And that scene, something similar to that was in 12 O'Clock High, that movie.
How about that?
So,
yeah. Going back, all the way back, we have a question up on the message board. I think a pretty good one. And we only have about 5 minutes left here. But going back to the videos that you were shown by the 2 Air Force officers, Can you describe what they actually showed you? You know, some you said you've seen before, but were there some like really interesting ones? This goes back to 1956, so there couldn't have been. Well, actually, there was quite a bit of filming in the 52 and stuff like that. But can you describe more of what you saw? Do you remember?
Well, these were all films. You know, it was a film they showed me. There was no video in those days.
Oh, well, that's what I meant. Films. Yeah, I know it was a projector and a
it was
screen.
all,
yeah.
You know, projector and it was a film of film, and the film quality was not good. I mean, it was jerky, and you could see the objects, you know, moving around, and it was more trying to find out is that similar to what you saw. They were trying to get a visualization of what I saw. They never actually showed me anything that was like what I saw. So, well, it's a light, it's bright, and you know, some of the shapes were kind of a little bit oblong looking that were moving. But I had seen, I guess in a movie or something somewhere, I had seen one of those films because I remember saying, "Oh, I've seen that before," but that's not what I saw. And I wish I could remember everything they showed me, but it was a full reel. I mean, it was like a newsreel of you know, one after another, and there was nothing in between that I recall. Like, okay, this is Los Alamos, 1948. This is Topeka, Kansas, 1950. Or I mean, there's nothing to say what it was. It was just here's the raw data. What about this? What about that?
Boy, I'd love to see that reel today.
Oh, wouldn't I love to see the field notes and everything that they had. They don't destroy that stuff. We know that. It's in a vault somewhere. Where we don't know. I'm trying to find out where those records might be. I understand that Captain Ruppelt's personal notes and records actually at one time, and they may still be at the Hynek Center. I've called them, written to them, and I can't get an answer. Nobody ever answers the phone. Nobody ever responds to messages. So I think there's a retired, I can't remember his name offhand, but there's a retired professor who has written a very exhaustive book on the subject and probably has more information on Ruppelt than anybody else. But I've been unable to get in contact with him. So if anybody, you know, out in the audience knows some of these guys that are prominent that could help me find those notes, I'd love to hear the reel to reel. I'd like to hear my 12-year-old voice telling the story. I'd like to see the scrapbooks one more time and see how much is real and how much is what I may have imagined in 60 years since then.
Right. So if anyone's out there listening that can somehow get any of this access or stumble across it, they can always get a hold of me and I can reach out to you. So thank you so much for the show this evening.
It's a pleasure. I hope I didn't talk your ear off.
Well, that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah. Well, it was great being able to share, and I'm sure I must have left something out along the way, but I've tried to be as comprehensive as I could.
Yeah, it was great. All right, thanks a lot.
You're welcome, Martin, and thank you for having me on.
Take care.
Bye.
All right, so that's it for tonight. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, we'll be back next week with Chris Lito. And remember also to keep your eyes to the sky.